Good evening. Welcome, everybody. My name's Andrew Holden. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of The Age, and I'll be your host and moderator this evening. So, on my left, Sushi Das, who is our opinion editor, or comment editor these days. Leonie Wood in the middle is our chief leader writer, the editorials of the paper. And at the end is Liz Minter, who is our senior letters editor. We have a couple of others who support Liz, but she's the main one. Liz, interestingly for you, and again, because I'm rambling a little bit, is the person that I've known the longest at The Age, I suspect. In fact, I think I've known Liz since she was about 14, I guess. And only because I went on a scholarship to Germany when I was 17 with her older sister. And Liz, too, I suspect this mere crowd is nothing given your tennis career. You've played in tens of thousands of people, so this one will be easy for you. As one of the Minter sisters, you might remember them, was a fantastic doubles team. Right, let's get into it. Let's start with some personal information. I'm going to start with you, Sush. So why don't you tell us who you are, where you've come from, and a little bit of your journalistic career before we talk about op-eds in the paper. You should have a mic.
You can hear me? Yes. Okay, good. I've been at The Age for nearly 20 years, and I've done a number of roles, including reporter, news editor, columnist and feature writer. I've been dipping my toe in the opinion editor's, that role for about 8 years, but I've been doing it full-time for nearly 4 years. I'm originally from London, and my parents, as you can probably tell, are from India. So I've lived in a bunch of different countries and have a little bit of international experience there.
Excellent. Thank you, Sushi. Leonie?
I didn't realise I'd be on so fast. I'm sorry.
Don't worry, we'll come back for the big speech. But...
Okay. And I don't always sound this sexy, I'm sure. My name is Leonie Wood. I've been a journalist since about 1985. I started at The Sun when it was The Sun News Pictorial, and then went to Australian Associated Press and the Australian Financial Review. Then I went backpacking, as you do, for 2 years, and came back and joined The Age at the beginning of 1996. I was a business reporter for almost all of that period until, was it 2011? We had the big restructuring. 2012? My, how time flies. So in 2012, I finally left the business section, and Andrew, the very next day after I'd asked, I think it was, made me start writing leaders, as journalists call them. You'd know them as editorials. So it's what The Age thinks, what The Age has an opinion about. So over to Liz.
Yeah, so I, as Andrew said, was a professional tennis player before I became a journalist. So I joined The Age as a cadet at about the age of 24. So I worked in a few roles, writing and also as a sub-editor. And then we went to London for about 8 years, where I worked at The Guardian for that whole time. Then we came back about 8 years ago, and I rejoined The Age, where I was did a couple of years as a sub-editor, and then I got the position, or I was offered the position as the letters editor, and I jumped at that because it's something that I've always really been interested in doing. So I feel very privileged to have this position, and I'll obviously talk more about that. But yes, I've been the letters editor or letters co-editor for about nearly five and a half years, which I think is quite a long time in the history. I'm not sure how that relates to sort of the longevity, but I think it's it can burn you out, this job, but for reasons we'll talk about later too.
Excellent, thanks very much. So back to you, Sush. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Opinion The Age, some of the key things you're thinking of when you put together, in particular, the 2 pages each day, and then also how that might be changing in terms of what you can put on our web pages as well?
Okay, so my responsibility at The Age is to produce the op-ed pages in print, so that's the comment pages, but also what appears on Comment Online as well. I'm sure, as you'll appreciate, commentary is an integral part of any media outlet's news coverage. Historically, the op-ed pages of a newspaper are among the best read sections, second only to the front page. That's why having an op-ed published in The Age, in print or online, is one of the best ways of putting an issue in the public eye and starting a debate, which is what those pages are all about. The Age takes commentary from lots of different places, columns essentially from our own staff columnists, like Peter Martin, our economics editor, or Mark Kenny, our chief political editor. We have a stable of commentators who are external. They're not staff, but they are regular contributors. So we have people like Jonathan Holmes, who writes on media issues, or Hugh White, who talks about international relations. We also have Wali Dali and Sally Young, who writes about history and politics. On top of that, we take pieces sometimes from newspapers around the world, like the New York Times or the Daily Telegraph in London. And, of course, we take submissions from the public as well. I frequently commission pieces myself on issues that I think are worth debating. Every day, I monitor 2 email inboxes into which I receive hundreds of pieces every week. Every single one is read. I don't always get round to sending everyone a personal reply, but they are read. Every day, I brief Andrew on the pieces that I've chosen for the day, and we have a discussion about it. Usually we run 3 in print or 4, and then a few more online. They're always debated in conference every morning. And as editors, our discussions are robust, and our decisions are often made on the fly, because time and deadlines are always looming in this business. In all opinion articles, I look for the same things. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run you very quickly through some of the things I look for so you have an idea of why I do the things I do. So firstly, strong pieces are those that don't equivocate, okay? They come down hard on one side of an argument. They don't necessarily go out of their way to balance left with right. It's not necessary. I'm interested in any piece that mounts a cogent and coherent argument to support a case. It usually identifies the counter-argument and refutes it with facts. It draws on expertise. It's passionate, but it's not emotional. A good piece will be timely and provocative. It should hit hard, marshal vivid images, use memorable analogies, and convincing logic. It should be informed by facts, not necessarily feelings, and it should aim to stimulate debate and drive a community discussion. It's quite okay for an op-ed to be written in a conversational style, or use humour if it's appropriate. It's perfectly okay for it to be controversial, but not outrageous. Personal anecdotes are always helpful in telling a tale, and a good piece should persuade without preaching. The best op-eds are not burdened by data. Statistics should be used like seasoning, a little sprinkle to add weight to the argument. Ideally, the piece should use anecdotes to enhance understanding of an issue, and specific references are always better than abstractions. A good piece always avoids jargon and acronyms and uses strong verbs. If you are sitting down to write an op-ed for The Age, I would say to you, ask yourself, what is my opinion? Make sure you have one. An op-ed can't simply be a sort of general discussion about things. It needs to say something. It needs to call for something, refute something, even celebrate something. Think about what the headline might be. And towards the end, as I always say to our own staff columnists, clearly restate your position, and you can, if you want to, issue a call to action. You can offer a solution or even a better approach. Now, all this takes the reader beyond mere criticism, okay? So basically, in a nutshell, a good opinion piece is one that persuades the reader to come round to the writer's way of thinking by the sheer force of the argument and the eloquence of the writing. Every day, I aim to choose for our readers challenging, provocative pieces on a wide variety of topics that I think might matter to people in this town. The Age runs pieces from the left and the right. We're not afraid to jolt our readers out of their comfort zones or shock them or even annoy them with the comment pieces that we run. That's because we aim to provide intellectual stimulation, entertaining reads, and cultural nourishment. We might not achieve this every day, but I do hope that we achieve it most days. Thanks.
Well said, Sushi. It's a great job. You get to read arguments all day long. She'll get me after for tomorrow for just suggesting how easy it was. But
I usually schedule my breakdown for about 4 o'clock on a Friday.
Yeah, that's fine. That's right. I've got better things to do than be in the office watching you break down. That's very true. Actually, you're not here on a Friday, so that's even better. Sushi, of course, most of her pieces are, 600 to 900 would be roughly about what you're dealing with, I think, in terms of the published size?
About 700 to 900.
Okay. Liz, of course, as letters editor, has to choose pieces that are 250 to maybe 50 words. So I suspect, Liz, quite a few of the things that Sushi said you're also looking for, but why don't you talk us through letters in particular and what you're looking for and how you make that very brutal selection in terms of who gets in?
It was interesting listening to Sushi because I was thinking, they're exactly the same things that I look for, but Sushi's writers have 800 words to do their article in, and you've got 200, so it makes it a very difficult task. But first, I respect our letter writers incredibly. I often talk with some of our senior journalists, and you can't get anything by our letter writers. When we've made a mistake or when the government has taken you for bunnies, I get letters all the time, and taking either us to task or the government of either persuasion, because they are so on the ball. They don't miss a trick, and I do respect them for that. But I mean, the good letters, as Sushi said about comment pieces, they are well argued. They have a point. They are letters that never get in are ones that tend to just repeat or précis what our article said. We might have an article, and then I'll get a letter saying, "Oh, I really disagree. I'm really annoyed about that because of this, this, and this." Well, that doesn't actually help. That doesn't take the debate any further. It's repeating what our article says. Well, so I'm actually looking for something that does take the debate a lot further. Academics sometimes get a good run, but I try not to run them too much because obviously they've got a lot more information than the general public, and I don't want them to monopolise the page, even though they do actually have the ability to take a debate a lot further because they just have that knowledge that sort of an ordinary citizen doesn't have. But I really look for originality. The personal stories, they are very powerful because when I read those, I think, I didn't think of that. It's humanising an issue, and a lot of people find it hard to put their names to it. And obviously, with certain cases, we do withhold names. But the original viewpoint, and later on, I'll give you a couple of. I've got some dates of some letters that stick in my mind. They're from years ago, but they're just so good. So the personal stories, but also the hypocrisy, picking out the hypocrisy of government policy. And this is why I get to the fact that our letter writers are so well read, because they can point to something that a politician said 6 months ago or 12 months ago, and they're saying the exact opposite now. I love reading those letters because it's just it really goes to prove how knowledgeable our letter writers are as a whole. So I've got the academics, the originality. And also, don't write too often. We get a lot of letter... That's one good way of getting published. We have a lot of letter writers who write at least once a day. Sometimes 3 times a day. It's not that I don't mind reading them. I read every letter. But I lose track of how often I've published people. Obviously, I do check the archives. But if I'm seeing the same name every day, I'm thinking, God, did I publish that person last week or was it a month ago? Or sometimes I think, I'm seeing that name all the time. I've obviously published that person recently. I'm not going to publish them for a while. And they might not get published for 2 months. So less is always better. Also, and I don't mind... We get a lot of letters where the grammar is not that... They're not that well written, but they make a very good point. That's fine. That's part of my job. Sometimes I'll take half an hour with a letter writer saying, I'm not sure exactly what you mean. Tell me in words what you're trying to say. They will actually talk me through the argument, and I'll say, OK, I will write that, and I will send that back to you and check that you're happy with that. So I just want to make sure that letter writers are never put off from writing a letter because their English is not very good or their grammar is not very good. It doesn't matter. When it comes out onto the page, it looks pretty spectacular sometimes from what I receive. But and I think that's part of being an inclusive page, because it's not you're not put off. We don't put people off just because their command of English or grammar isn't that high. I do get abusive letters. They're a bit upsetting because I'm actually always trying my best. But and I would say that you always catch more flies with honey than vinegar. So if you are upset with your letter, the way your letter is published, that's fine. But it would probably be helpful if you couched it in a nice way instead of saying some of the very nasty, and it's just, I'll hit the delete button. But no, it's I get sworn at and all the rest of it, and it's it's part of the job when you are trying your best. But it's yeah. But as I said, I'll probably be able to explain more with questions as well. So, thank you.
Excellent, well done, Liz. Thank you very much. Leonie, they're providing a conduit between the views of others and passing them back to the readers. You're the one who, and it's very unusual, I must say, for the leader writer to be identified, because generally it's the view of the paper, it's the editor or editor-in-chief who takes responsibility. So we tend to hide the leader writers from the public simply because they are reflecting a paper's view, if you like. So it's great that we can have you here to talk about the discipline and the intellectual thought that goes into preparing leaders in my name. So thank you for it. It's a confession, isn't it? I don't write them myself. I'm a lazy bugger. This is the one who does the hard work. So Leonie, talk us through the creation of a leader, of a paper's opinion. What are you looking for? What are the steps that you go through to make sure that it fits the overall ethos of the masthead?
It's actually a very interesting point that you mentioned about anonymity, because it has been a tradition within the Age, and a very hard and fast tradition within the Age, that the leader writer is not identified. Again, the leader is the editorial, it leads the paper. And I always thought it was for the safety and security of the writer.
It's really to save the editor the humiliation of admitting he doesn't do any work.
Yeah, okay. It is interesting, though, the way the forum has been set up tonight, and I must admit, with the flu and tonsillitis, I hadn't really got it clear in my head. Sushi here is dealing with the opinions of all the bigwigs in town and across Australia. And Liz is dealing with the opinions of everybody in the street, the yous and me's of the world. And I get to write an opinion, and it is such an honour to have my job. You have no idea. I wake up every morning and just go, thank you, this is so much fun. To have the opinion of the Age. Now, you don't always agree with our editorials, and we know that because we get the phone calls and the letters and so on from people saying, I'm cancelling my subscription. Sorry, but, you don't always agree with your mother or your father or your brother or your sister or your best friend either. And honestly, if we were to reflect always and every day the opinion of every reader, we would be saying nothing at all. What we do try and do is have a body of opinion that lasts over years. So I call it small steps, little incremental steps that add to our view on one thing or another. Major topics on health, education, asylum seekers. The way that we develop the debate can sometimes be so small that you don't quite notice it. Other days we take complete right angle and we do have a very strong opinion on something. And I've brought along 3 of those editorials from last year that created, well, near havoc in the office one day. But we'll go through that in a minute. First of all, I work in sort of isolation from the journalists, on the floor, right next to them all the time. But I consult with the major journalists who have got the major rounds. If I'm writing something about health or education or state politics or Canberra politics or something, I do like to get on the phone and talk to the journalists that are covering those rounds, because they have absolutely detailed, nuanced opinions on, and they know the tempo of the debate from where they're sitting. On the other hand, Andrew, Sushi and I and 1 or 2 others sometimes in the morning meet at about 10:30 every morning, and we discuss what is happening in the world. We discuss what some of the major things might be that for that day we will write an editorial about it. So can I say what tomorrow's is? I'm sorry, I didn't write tomorrow's, but the editorial in tomorrow's paper will be about Peter Grester, the Australian journalist who works for Al Jazeera, who has just been jailed in a Cairo court. Those kinds of decisions come both from all of us having a very good sense of what the news is of the moment, but also having very strong opinions, because the editorial has to be an opinion. It is our opinion, the Age's opinion. And again, as I say, sometimes you're not going to agree with us on it. But, you know, you're still going to love us and you're still going to buy us. How do I write? I sit down and I try and listen deep, deep inside me. What do I want to say? And how do I want to say it? And I take a long time trying to hear the noise inside my head, which I call the voice. And once I can hear that tempo, the noise of how strongly do we feel this, how subtly do we work into it, or do we just come out and say exactly what we want to say, then I sit down, and often it just flows from start to finish in one go. And one of those was an asylum seeker editorial that we wrote last year. I wrote this probably 9 months after I'd started in the job, 8 months after I'd started in the job. And it had its genesis in a 2-line letter. What do we call those right-hand letters? And another thing. You know, the really short letters? Okay, and it came from a man whose name I will withhold, who lived in Blackburn. And this is the first couple of sentences of that editorial. A reader asked in a letter on these pages on Friday why the Age crusades in support of asylum seekers. He said most of us, referring presumably to Australians generally, wanted a reduction in migration and that refugees should simply be rejected. So I read the letter on the train on the way in the morning, and I think that morning the editorial conference, the opinion conference, was talking about, I don't know, having another whack at Premier Baillieu or Prime Minister or something. And I said, no, have a look at this letter. And everyone just sort of looked at it for a while. And I said, do we crusade in favour of asylum seekers? Is that a good thing? Is it okay for journalists to crusade at all? And I spent a little while really thinking it through, and then I finally said to myself, yes, it is okay for us to crusade. And then I had to find out what we, as the Age, believe. Why do we crusade in favour of asylum seekers? So I went on to say, irrespective of what the majority may or may not support, the Age has its views. And we respectively welcome the opportunity today to explain our position on asylum seekers, especially as the nation got into an election campaign. So I had to formulate from first principles what it is that the Age believes, because I couldn't find anything that actually said what the Age believes in. We crusade for asylum seekers and do so proudly because we believe in liberty and justice. We believe that civilisation is enhanced by aiding the disadvantaged, not by demonising classes of people or ostracising individuals. We believe in equity, in giving people opportunities to build better lives, and in fostering the human spirit, not quashing it. And we believe democracy and this nation's economy is and always will be enriched by the extraordinary diversity of people who have come from all over the world to make Australia their home. These are ideals that Australia too supports. That to me was the foundation stone for what I want to build on in the editorials from here on in. So I keep that in my mind, that we do believe in liberty and justice and in equity in everything that we look at. We also believe in free market. So there was another one that came up, which was possibly the one where I think we got some death threats. Anyway, they happen. But we did. Andrew, thankfully, did come into the newsroom, I think, the next day and did a video and explained our position. It didn't come out of the blue, age readers. It was something that we had been thinking of for a very long time, and it was an editorial that was published on June 22nd, 2013, which I think is just 1 year away, wasn't it? And I wanted to fashion it very carefully. I did not necessarily agree with what this editorial said, but it's my job to reflect the views of what the editor and the paper generally wants to say. And we said it was time for Julia Gillard to stand aside as the leader of the Labor parliamentary leader of the Labor Party, and to stand aside as Prime Minister of Australia. And our argument was that the debate that Labor needed to have in terms of policy was not being effected, it was not being heard, because of the personality clashes within the Labor Party. So we made the call that it was time for her to stand down as the leader of the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party. I think we lost a lot of subscribers that day. But that's what we believed. And we didn't...
It's a very brave call, Leonie. Well done.
Thank you. We didn't just dream it up. As I said, we nearly made that call some months earlier, but it would have been on the wrong basis had we called for it then. The third editorial I want to take you to was our pre-election editorial. And we had a letter about this just recently from a publisher from Allen and Unwin in Sydney. And she just happened to be, I guess, Googling things about the Age or about the what the different newspapers thought in the lead up to the election. We were the only newspaper that said we supported Labor in that election. And our first line was, "The Age has long held that policy, not personality, is the core of our democracy. It is on this basis that we advocate a vote for Labor in the federal election on Saturday." I wanted to come straight out and say what we were going to say so that I didn't sort of drag you backwards through the hedge and you finally got a surprise at the end of it all. But the reason why this particular publisher had written to us was she took an excerpt from it, and I'm sorry I had forgotten about it, but it still rings like a bell. On the issue of trust, the Coalition's own actions leave us with significant reservations. It has obfuscated and ducked critical issues, deliberately keeping voters uninformed about its savings plans or revenue-raising initiatives. Worse has been its breathtaking arrogance in cynically delaying until the last minute its policy costings. This from the party that drafted the Charter of Budget Honesty. So when we came to that particular election editorial, we had a meeting. I think there was 10 of us in the room, and this debate we had inside the room went for over an hour or so. Andrew kindly had given me a couple of weeks to study up all the policies that each of the parties were putting to the electorate. And as you look back on it now, you can see what an incredibly wafer-thin platform they were all working with. The NBN was important, and it's hardly a matter at all that is discussed now. There was almost nothing in terms of economic meat that you could deal with in a policy from either side. When we discussed these policies, we came to the conclusion that on all of them, most of them, we agreed with Labor. And it was very difficult for us, believing in policy as the key issue, to then say, vote for the Coalition. Even if you disagreed with the personalities that were leading the Labor Party, it was the policies that was driving our decision. So that's how we come to some of the decisions that we make on the leaders each day. Again, as I said, I do a lot of reading. I read things like the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Economist, the Times, the Financial Times. We just absorb everything, and I read The Australian every single day. I read its editorials every single day. I read just about everything its commentators write, because it's our competition, and we respect them. We think they're off the beam sometimes, but we do respect them. I read the Financial Review through and through, and I read the Financial Review's editorials as well, and often they are in sync with The Australian. So, again, as I say, when you get angry at the editorials, it's our opinion. It's the Age's opinion. You can, pick the paper up tomorrow and you'll probably agree with us. But if you disagree with us, that's great. That's fine, because that's what vibrancy of debate is about. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you very much. There's a very rich field for you to delve into. So I'm going to just ask one question of Sushi before we open the floor. There are 2 mics on either side, so one for each half. Please put your hand up and get ready to ask a question. It's a question, please. If you'd like to make a comment, short and sharp, and then move to a question. If you can identify which of the panel you'd particularly like to address your question to, that would certainly help. Because, as I say, it's quite broad between general opinion pieces, the Age's opinion, and Liz's letter writers, so it's quite complex. So feel free to put your hand up and we'll start getting a mic to you. Sush, the question I wanted to ask you is your favourite columnist, regular columnist, and mics, if we can start moving, please, so they're ready to ask the question after this, and why?
I think probably Wali Dali is my favourite columnist because he is consistently different and he always comes up with a new way of looking at things, and he has this fantastic ability to zoom out and see the big picture, and he writes beautifully, and I hardly ever have to correct anything that he puts right.
I agree, he's fantastic. I will start here and then I will come to the one there. So we'll start here, please. Thank you, sir.
Leonie, thanks for your comment about crusading. When so much of the print media is unreadable because there's such an overt political agenda being pushed, why does a newspaper have a right to crusade on an issue rather than report the views of others?
Did you say why do they or do not?
Why do you have a right?
Because we are a newspaper does not mean that our journalists are partisan or biased in their reporting. And that has been, for me, an amazing transition, having to come from being a journalist who did not have a column and had to report the facts. And I'm from old school journalism, I can tell you. I don't write blogs or anything like that. I come from the straight up black and white, you report what happens side of journalism. So it was a very hard wrestle with myself as to whether or not it was okay to crusade for asylum seekers. And then when I realised we stand for certain things, we have to stand for certain things. As a newspaper, we have to stand for certain values. And if those are your values, then yes, you do end up crusading for some of the most disadvantaged people in our community. And it's imperative that you do. It doesn't mean that our journalists in their reporting will do that, but it means that we have a voice as the Age and we should use that. Does that make sense? I hope that agrees with you, Andrew.
No, it does. I think you look at the history of the Age too, and you go back to the Syme brothers and David Syme, and it was quite definitive about what the Age stood for. It was a protectionist paper. It was state rights. It's had a long-standing history. I think one of the interesting elements that comes into particularly the pre-election one was that our political editor, Michael Gordon, was not one of the 10 in the room. We'd spoken to Michael, but our feeling was that there's a potential to compromise him in his reporting and his own opinions if he's dragged into it. So he was informed of what the view of the paper was going to be the next day, and he took it upon himself to inform the Prime Minister of what we were going to do. But we felt there needs to be a separation so that he can do what he needs to do as the reporter at the most senior reporter in politics. So he has a separation from what the paper itself what its opinion might be. So we were quite deliberate about that. Thank you that Mike can move. So there's one here. Thank you, Madam.
Yes, as someone who's had the Age in their household literally all my life, one of the most dramatic things, I guess, has been the change in the size of the Age. And I'd be interested to hear from any or all of you what sort of challenges, decisions you had to make in regards to adapting to that?
Well, from the opinion page's point of view, it's been good and it's sort of been bad as well. So I'll tell you both sides. It's bad because when it was a broadsheet, we used to run 4 fairly reasonable-sized pieces every day. And in the tabloid format, we only run 3 now. But the good side of being a tabloid size is we now devote 1 entire page to an article, which can sometimes run up to 1,000 words. Now, we were never able to do that in broadsheet. And when you allow an argument to run to 900,000 words, you give the opportunity to the writer to really go into a lot of detail and use all their expertise to mount that argument. So from that point of view, it's actually been a good thing. But much of the op-ed pages haven't changed. We still have the best cartoonists in Australia drawn on the page. We still, I think, have engaging and lively copy. That hasn't changed. Yes, the way we deliver it is different, but what we deliver, I don't think on the comment page the quality has been any different to what we used to do.
Sorry, Andrew, I've just got a quick point to make. The size issue, to me, doesn't really matter. We in the broadsheet for the editorials, we used to have 2 editorials. So a main one saying something very important and the other one underneath saying something perhaps a little lighter. But we are now a very digital organisation. And what that has meant is our opinions, Sushi's people that she's publishing and the editorials are now being spread very quickly on social media. Tweeting and Facebook, for example, Google as well. And, for example, some of these editorials I've got here were shared on Facebook 200,000 times. One of them was tweeted, I think it was 17,000 times. So it's a transition that maybe some people that still receive the Age in their letterbox feel, but to us we're also thinking about what the digital community is looking at and how they're using their devices to pass on the opinion pieces and the editorials and the letters.
Liz, just on size, have you had to cut back letters, same number? The mic should be over on this side somewhere, thank you, and then I'll go I'll go across the net one by one. Sir.
The name of the publication is The Age, but I'm getting a bit confused as time goes by, but there are several ages because what's on the app is not necessarily covering all the stories that are in the paper. What's on the website might include more articles. Are you able to sort of clarify, do all the letters that run in the paper go on the app, and do all the opinion pieces on the app go on the website, or is there sort of several different versions?
Speaking for the letters will always run on the app, iPad. You're talking about the iPad? Yeah. So the iPad, online, and the print. They don't change. Nothing gets added to them at all. They're the same.
So she was a little bit different because you've got options digitally that you haven't got.
On the op-ed page, in the newspaper, you will read the least of what we can deliver because we're constrained by space, okay? But online, you will get everything that's in the paper plus more. And on the iPad, you get everything that we have in The Age and sometimes stuff we run in the Sydney Morning Herald as well. So you always get more choices of things that you might want to read digitally than you do in the actual paper.
And of course, as print subscribers, you get free access to all those digital. So that's the particular benefit. You, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to ask our free journalists to put on their Sibylline cap, and I'm wondering if they could make a comment as to how the following public issues are going from what they've read from people coming into them. First issue is counsellors in schools versus chaplains. The second issue is what seems to be an interesting discussion on the euthanasia debate. So I'm wondering if you ladies could give us a comment on what you have perhaps sensed coming out of these two issues?
Looks to me like, Liz, you're ready to tell us what our readers are thinking. Yours, please.
Well, from our readers' perspective, of the letters we get on euthanasia, voluntary euthanasia, 99% are in support. So it's interesting with these sort of issues because I'm always accused of bias. It's like I got a letter, actually, I forwarded it to Andrew yesterday saying, what was it about? Oh, Julian Burnside's article on asylum seekers that Sushi ran on her page a couple of days ago, and he set out a couple of solutions that he had for regional processing, or the Tasmanian solution. And I got quite an aggressive letter saying, "Oh, is the Age showing its bias? You ran one letter in supporting Burnside, and I look at the online comments. 60% are running against Burnside's opinion. So I have to back up every letter that I run, or the way I structure it. So I did a search. I knew in the back of my mind what was happening, but I did a search on Burnside's column, the letters. We got 14 letters, all supported Julian Burnside, and there was one letter that made a personal attack on Burnside and his opinion, and that just rules it out straight away because I'm not going to run a personal attack on Julian Burnside. So basically 14 letters were in support of Burnside's position. So we're accused of bias, but I can't run a letter against his column if I don't get it. So, so coming back to euthanasia, it is overwhelming in support of voluntary euthanasia. And counsellors, I would say it's probably 60-40, 70-30 in favour of welfare officers as opposed to chaplains.
Sushi?
On the euthanasia debate, which I always dread, it's very, very similar to the abortion debate. Okay, so people have got their entrenched positions, very, very hard to persuade them to move over to another idea, okay? And there aren't a lot of debates that are that polarised, but euthanasia and abortion tend to fall into those categories. When we have run pieces that relate to euthanasia, I've done my best to try and canvass as many points of view as possible and not just keep having that which you can get with those kinds of issues. So recently we ran a chap called Peter Short who had been diagnosed with a terminal illness, and he gave a very moving outline of his situation. We frequently do run Nicholas Tonti-Filippini, who runs on the other side. We've had pieces from Rodney Syme too. I would say that, like the abortion debate, the euthanasia debate, it's very, very difficult to give you an idea of the numbers because it's so evenly split. There are as many people out there sending me opinion pieces that are pro-euthanasia as there are against, and I would say the same for abortion. These are two very difficult debates to have, and the way I always approach them is to try and get as many different voices as possible. On the issue of counsellors in schools and chaplains, I'd say that I think a lot of the pieces that I get lean away from the pro-chaplain position. And I only say lean away. It is not a definite hard and fast, but that's where those kinds of pieces generally fall into that category, away from that.
You don't have to go there, Leonie.
Thanks.
That's fine. Exactly. Where was it? So I'm over this side, thank you, and then we'll come over here. There's hands flying. Thank you. Yes.
The three of you, do you still get shocked sometimes by the letters and the responses you get that are so, I guess, extreme from what you've published, or have you become immune to the hatred, I guess, or such as on asylum seekers, the extreme views?
With the asylum seeker issue, it's quite difficult because views are very polarised. So, again, our letters favour the asylum seeker and humane treatment of asylum seekers, sort of 95% 98% are in favour of humane treatment. And I think this is often the difficulty with running letters on the issue is because the debate doesn't go anywhere. It's like the government will get sort of more and more extreme in its responses, and our letter writers will say this is just outrageous, we cannot treat people like this. There's only so many times I can run letters like that, and it's very... So sometimes like we just might not even run letters on the issue because there's... Or we might run one, but we don't make a big theme about it because all the letter writers tend to say the same thing. But look, we don't get a lot of hate mail. When I raised that, it was more just sort of a bit of personal thing. Oh, why did you edit it that way, or why did you put that headline on, or you think, well, I've got 6 words to put on a headline. It's pretty hard to encapsulate 200 words in six words. But no, so I do find it difficult with a lot of issues because the debate is polarised. So, and we tend to only get a 95% split on, say, asylum seekers. What's another tricky?
Let me frame the question in a further way, and we talked about this a little bit last week, Liz. Does the Age, have we scared away the right-wing letter writers and the right-wing commentators, and that's why they don't write to us anymore? Is that what's... And I'm not saying you, but just, that whereas I can pick up the Australian and I can see the sort of letter that you would look at and go, well, if you'd written that to me, I'd have published that, because that's quite a good articulation of that particular viewpoint. So it's a little around the question, the polarisation of the media. Is it our fault, or is... I don't know. What do you think's happening here?
And that's the issue that I do find frustrating, because we do get very... they're pretty well centre-left letter writers, and that's great. They make good arguments. And probably once a fortnight I'll get a letter saying, I'm so sick of your anti-Abbott letters, why don't you publish a pro-Abbott one? And I will very politely respond to them saying, thank you, I would like to write a pro-Abbott letter, but I don't get any. So I'm sick of being accused of... We are sick of being accused of bias when we don't get letters to publish. So I'm not sure why we don't get many, because I will respond to them and say, please put your argument to me and I will give it full consideration. And then I never hear from them again. But I do find it frustrating, because I think it's very important to have a balanced letters page. It is very important to have both sides, but I just don't get them, and I don't know, maybe I am scaring them away, and I don't know how to encourage them back.
Well, the hint for this group might be that if you're not getting published as a centre-left, change your political view, you'll get in the paper.
Can I just say something on that?
Choose, absolutely, on opinion.
I think that on the op-ed page we run quite a few voices that are from the right, not just from the left. Overall, I would say most of the comment pieces do come... They are from people who are slightly left of centre in the pieces that they write, but it's not that hard to find voices that say something different. So can I just give you an example of all the people who come from right of centre, okay, that we have run recently, okay? Peter Coleman, editor of Quadrant, Joe Hockey, the treasurer, John McLean, a climate sceptic, Bob Carter, a climate sceptic, Nick Minchin, a climate sceptic, Terry Barnes, Peter Reith is a regular, Peter Costello was a regular, Amanda Vanstone still is a regular, Nicole Flint, Chris Berg, Tom Switzer. These are just some of the names that we run who are right of centre. So perhaps it's a little bit easier on the op-ed pages, because we do get voices from both sides of the political divide. And frequently, I look at the Australian, and I look at who's writing on their pages, because they tend to run more of the same than we do. And I ring their writers and I say, want to write a piece for The Age? And frequently they say yes. So it's very easy for me, much easier than it is for Liz, to find those right of centre voices and encourage them to write for us, and they frequently do.
Leonie, I'll bring you in here and then we'll do another question. So given that The Age is the most left-wing paper in Australia, we've moved from being the Spencer Street Soviet to Pravda, I think is what we're generally categorised as. do you agree with that? Is it a question of measure against, well, what's right and left in the current political debate?
In terms of where we end up as an editorial?
Yeah.
No, we have... it's not a question of balancing, it's a question of us arguing out opinions and having very developed opinions within the editorial itself. I think the question, though, is very interesting in terms of it asked us whether we're surprised, I think, about the responses that we get or shocked. I am staggered by some of the comments that come in on digital media in response to people's articles, opinions, and so on. There's a very vile and nasty streak that tends to emerge in the digital realm where people think that what they're putting up is anonymous, and to a large extent it is. And even though we have dedicated production journalists moderating in terms of trying to weed out some of the most offensive stuff, sometimes what is still written and remains is absolutely vile, and people think they have a licence to get away with that. Now, I don't get the abuse. I feel like I live in a corner and nobody ever talks to me, honestly. What Liz gets all the time from letter writers and what Sushi does in terms of debating often with the commentators in our pages. But in terms of the right-left debate, you can see very clearly in some of the rest of the major mastheads, the Australian to name one, a very keen and eager, feral almost, bias to support the right wing of politics at the moment. Although, I'll take one step back from that, because you do watch some of their journalists moderating their opinions, particularly in the last 6 months. I think even the Australian has been somewhat surprised by the Abbott government, a government that said we will be a government of no surprises. I think it has even surprised the Australian a little bit. But it would be great to hear more vigorous, rational voices from the right. And unfortunately, the rational aspect, I think, of what the right commentators want to say is often missing. It comes down to a lot of personal abuse, and that's not debate, that's just invective.
I just had a point to add to that about the anonymity and the comments. I think that's why people like the letters page so much, because it is measured, it is not... We don't allow personal attacks. I don't actually read online comments because I find them really quite vile and distressing. And I think because the letters pages, you have to have your name, your suburb. There's no anonymity. You have to have... It does temper the debate, and I think it's a much more civilised place, and people feel safe to raise even tricky opinions because they know it will still be treated with respect.
Madam, please.
Liz, with regard to the letters, who chooses this subject line? Is it something you ask the contributors to put when they send a letter to you, or do you... What happens?
Yes. So what happens is I get all my the hundreds of letters that get sent in, and as I read them all, and every day I have to choose a theme. So sometimes the theme is obvious, like tomorrow it's obvious because we got a lot of responses in the Peter Grester trial. And it's actually quite interesting how often the letters that we get and the theme that I publish is the same as the editorial.
And I don't know that.
No, we work in isolation, and it's just interesting because that is what our readers are telling us, that this is what they're interested in, and they... And I just find that actually quite interesting how often we are writing on the same. And often our letter writers make the same point that the editorial...
Sometimes they do it a lot better.
But I choose, I'll choose the headline, but it depends on the subject matter of the letters as a whole. That then decides my theme as to what people are responding to the most, and the best... sort of the best argued letters, they then become the theme. Then the rest of the letters that are just a general good topics, they become the body of the letters. And then obviously the shorts are sent in as shorts. They're not long letters that I cut down to 2 lines. They are actually, and that's a skill in itself to write those shorts. I couldn't write them, and they're so pithy often. And so they're self-selecting in that letter writers are writing short letters.
Excellent. Who's got the mic over on this side? Are we going there? All right, okay. Don't show bias.
On the question of balance, could you make some comments about climate denialists and their potential for being published in this day and age, given the science and what the science is saying about the issue?
Generally, well, I've been doing the job for 5.5 years. I'm not a scientist. I am reasonably well read, but I'm not up with the science. I don't run letters that discuss the scientific. I run letters that discuss the politics, because I can't. It's not a debate that we are going to solve in 150 words of discussing why a scientist is wrong because of all the statistics and those sort of issues. So I look at politics, the politics of the issue, and that's where I tend to publish. But I think it's also possibly Andrew. You like?
That's right. Sushi, do you want to...
This is a really difficult issue on the op-ed pages. It's very contentious. Every time I have run a climate skeptic on the page, my colleagues have come down on me like a ton of bricks. But I refuse to only run one side of it, okay? Now, it's really a question of weight. We know that the vast number of people in the community accept that there is climate change and that human beings induce this, okay? We know that the vast majority of people believe that. And so I try and make the pieces that I run reflective of what the general community believes in. But there are people out there who are climate skeptics, and we can't just say, no, we're not going to hear from you. We do have to hear from them, but we just don't make them as prominent or run them as often as we do those other kinds of pieces. And it's a really hard one to go with, but I do what I can on that one. Yes.
The mic should be in this half, is it? Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I have a question for Sushi, please. Is there an ideal time of day to submit? And
she's up at 2. You can send it at 2 a.m. She'll read it then.
Secondly, if you submit something that doesn't get a run, is it never going to be run? Is it ever worth submitting it again? Can you then go and submit it elsewhere? Could you advise on that, please?
Okay. This question I get asked probably more often than any other question. If you are writing on an issue that is really hot, it's just happened, and you reckon it needs to be in the paper tomorrow, then you have to get it to me before midday. Because remember, in the morning, I have to tell Andrew what I'm going to have on my page, and that conference happens at 10:30 or thereabouts in the morning. So noon is really the latest. Beyond that, we're looking at the day after that, okay? If you send something to The Age, what you'll get, if you send it to the correct address, and the correct address is opinion@theage.com.au, you will get an automatic response saying, thanks, we got it. We'll be in touch if we are able to use it. And I will be in touch with you within 1 or 2 days, if not the same afternoon, if I think this is something that really has to be used, okay? If you don't hear from me for about 3 or 4 days, it doesn't mean it's over. It just means I'm really busy. But I do aim to get back to people within a week, okay? That's my personal sort of what I try and do. If you don't hear within a week, it means we won't be probably using it. And then you might, 3 weeks later, get a little note from me saying, sorry, we were unable to use it. But that's, I would say, if you don't hear within a week or so, you're probably struggling to get in.
Thank you, down the front.
My question was half just asked and half answered, but on the same theme, what's your attitude to us if we submit a letter that we think is on the topic and well written, it doesn't get in a day later or 2 days later? Does it put you off if we resend it? And related, what's the relationship between the different versions of The Age? It feels like the weekday versus the Saturday versus the Sunday are different categories. Do you have to try and pick one, or do they get passed across?
Okay. Well, first I'll deal with the Sunday Age just quickly. The Sunday Age letters deal mainly with the topics that were raised in the previous Sunday. Often we'll get letters people think that it's a 7-day-a-week operation, which it sort of is, but the letters is a bit different. We do go on the previous weeks. Sometimes I don't have quite enough letters, so I will look at what was run earlier. And it's sometimes tricky if a news article has been, or if an article has been published and it's going to be an ongoing issue, then we tend to run some of the responses in the Monday because it'll be just so out of date by the time the Sunday comes around. But if you don't resend letters, we get them, because often people do resend. Look, sometimes I'll run a letter a week or 2 weeks after it's been sent in, because what happens, some days I find it difficult to get a coherent theme because I've just got so many disparate letters, and there's nothing that stands out as to how I can get 5 letters on one topic. So I will just sometimes in the email inbox I'll just put in education, climate change, schools, politics, I don't know, just keywords to try and see if I can get 5 really good logical letters out of that. So just because it hasn't been run in the first day or two doesn't mean that it won't get a run, but it's probably more likely to But the other thing about what I find often with breaking stories is that often people, they write their best letters of an evening. They don't like writing them when they're rushed at work, or they've only got 5 minutes. So often when we run the theme, the best letters are actually run sort of 2 days afterwards. So I'm also conscious of that. We sometimes it seems like we're 2 days behind the a couple of days behind the 8 ball, but that's actually because our letter writers, they need to mull over an issue and they will write that night. Well, I've got to, like Sushi, I've got to I'm starting to edit my letters at 1 o'clock, and so they will just miss the paper, but that doesn't rule them out, because they do, if they're well-written letters, they definitely hold for a couple of days, and so often letters get published 2 or 3 days after they've been sent in, so don't lose heart if it's not published straight away.
Is the mic's there? I'm going to have to... Is the mic on the floor? No, it isn't. Sorry, we're already over. And I do want to allow the ladies to spend 15, 20 minutes, depending on whether Leonie, if she can stay with us, whether she feels well enough, just have a chat afterwards. And I know it feels like we've zipped through that hour. In fact, it's 1 hour and 10, so it's been a great debate. Again, can I thank you? You're our most loyal supporters. You're the ones who are dedicated to us. We really appreciate it. You allow us to do the journalism, and in this particular case, the opinion that we so much love. Please join me in thanking Liz, Leonie and Sushi for coming on today.